let's go ahead and kick this off. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Steve Teresi. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Services here at JL Audio. I'm located in South Florida. Now, our main headquarters is just a few miles south of me in Miramar, Florida. And I have with me Mr. Rob Haynes, joining us from Southern California. Say hello, Rob.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Excellent. So Rob and I will be minding the Facebook chat. So if you have questions or comments, him and I will be answering that, because the man of the hour, the man, the myth, the legend from the Pittsburgh area is Mr. Kevin Ferry. Say hello, Kevin.
What's happening, everybody? Thanks for joining us today.
Indeed. So Kevin will be doing our presentation today, and this is a fun one. We're going to warn you straight up. There's no way we're getting this done quick. And a lot of it has to do with the content itself. We're going to be talking about system design. And that's a pretty broad topic in and of itself. And you've got people like me that love to interrupt. And Rob has already challenged me on this one that he may interrupt more than I will. So we're scaring Kevin because he's already worried about this time as it is. And knowing I already saw Steve Moss in the chat, so I know he's going to have a lot to share about this. And I imagine some of the other regulars are in there. I haven't had a chance to look yet. But enough about that from me. Let's go ahead and kick it over to Kevin. Why don't you share your screen and get into the presentation, and we'll see you in a bit.
Oops. All righty. You got us going, Rob? We got the right screen and everything?
We are good to go, Mr. System Design.
All righty. Let's get to this. And it's interesting because we have such a great dynamic between myself, Steve, and Rob. You know, Rob's an amazing salesperson, and he really has that strong passion for that. And Steve's just a really technical guy, and he's really got that passion for that. And I'm the installer kind of the group, and I really have that passion for that. So for all of us to kind of come together and brainstorm, we all have our different ways of looking at some of these things, and that's really where the time consumption is going to happen with it. And so you're going to get a nice variety of perspective on how to design a system, and really looking at all of the different aspects of that. And it is going to be a glimpse of that, because when we take a look at all of this stuff, there is so much to cover, and we are trying to keep it to today. So we want to have that finished at some point in time today.
Some point in time, yes.
So when we look at system design and what matters, there's going to be a performance expectation, and that's probably first and foremost, right? I mean, whether you're sitting there and you listen to your buddy's system and you want something that's a little bit louder than his, or whether you've had this cool demo at some point in time, it's some area there you have some sort of performance expectations, whether it's you want to sit in your car and you want it to be like a concert, or you see these people on the internet doing hair tricks and you want your vehicle to be able to do that. There is some sort of expectation, and with especially the latter part of that expectation, there's reliability, and it's really the untold. What matters for that is having reliability. You don't come in and say, I want something that's really reliable, right? I mean, you come in, you just expect that. It should be some sort of given.
We're going to get really upset if you don't get it, right?
Right. Yeah. So we're going to go in and we're going to talk about how to get to these expectation, and how to minimize some of the issues that may cause some reliability issues in the vehicle, and what fits the vehicle. You can't design a system that just doesn't fit that specific vehicle. You're going to have a compromise somewhere. And budget, we're not going to get super deep on budget, but we do have to address it. It is a concern that, you know, you only have a certain amount of money to spend on your system. Where should you put that money? So we'll get into the budget and talk a little bit about that.
What do you mean fits the vehicle? I can't put 315s in my Honda Del Sol?
you can, but they're not going to actually work for you.
You could. Your roof latches may not work very well because you can't shut it, but you could possibly do that. So
you don't need a passenger seat.
So the expectations that we have when we are looking at a system and designing it, and this is a very personal expectations for me. You know, we go in and we look, and most people think that base is that first expectation, and it is 99% of the time. If we talk to somebody, what are they looking for? They're looking to get loud. Well, what's the easiest way to get loud? Bass. what are most systems lacking when you go and purchase a newer vehicle? It's normally lacking bass. So we are, that is one of your first expectations. The second one could be a full sound, a balanced sound, a very clean sound. Maybe you want to sit in that vehicle and you want to have that concert-like experience. You're not so focused on that that bass rattling the car next to you and all of that good stuff. You personally just want to sit in the vehicle, have a good, enjoyable listening experience, and really have that reproduction like you remember going and seeing John Mayer or something like that, or Buckethead, right? See, and have
Thank you. I appreciate that.
it takes you there. So I feel like Buckethead puts you into both 1 and 2 there.
Yes, exactly. Relax now. It's been said.
And then we take a look at the quality of the product, the quality of the install, and all of that. How's it going to look? You know how many vehicles that I've seen up for sale, like custom vehicles, that people are asking $100,000 plus, and they have a set of 6x9s just cut into the back deck of them. Like, there is a look and a sound and all of that stuff, and you have to just take that into consideration when you are looking at, especially your budget. You know, you can pay for something that has an amazing look and a custom install on there, but you may have to compromise some of the sound quality on that aspect. Or if you have the budget, you can do both. And louder, like I said earlier there, louder. And when we talk about louder, what do you want to be louder than? And you have to have some sort of reference. Do you want it louder than what it is currently? Do you want it louder than a system that you heard 10 years ago that was 415s and a Del Sol? You have to kind of figure out where that bass is, because if you don't know what your expectations are, what your performance goal is, it's very, very hard to make a plan to come up with to get you there.
I have a story, but you knew this. When I was in retail many, many years ago, we had a customer come in with a vehicle. It was a Mazda, I forget the model, but it was a nice one. And he wanted a really high-end system, and, conversation, kind of, doing the Rob thing and vetting it out, doing the probing questions, and come to find out he's got a really high-end home audio system. And he started mentioning some really high-end brands, and I was like, ooh, this guy might be a sound quality guy. So I designed a whole spec system that was really great, top of the line component speakers, and, the JL Audio subwoofer, of course, and, some, really nice amplifiers. And we actually went through and started vetting out different CD players, gives you an idea how long ago it was, different CD players to find the one that sounded the best with the system in there. And we dialed it all in, and so happy. I sat in the car for hours just listening to different types of music. Thought the car sounded fantastic. One of the best sounding cars I think I had done at the time, and maybe it's probably top 10 that I've ever done. So the customer shows up, and I'm all excited to play this car for him. So he sits in the driver's seat, and I'm in the passenger seat. And I'm just like melting. This car sounds really good. After a couple of tracks, he turns it down. He's like, "How come the highs aren't really bright?" And I kind of sat back a little bit. I'm like, "Well, I mean, it's really balanced. It sounds really good." He's like, "And I thought the bass would be stronger." And that's when it hit me. He had a budget, but he didn't have an ear. So he had the money to buy the top of the line home audio stuff, and he had no idea what he bought. And sure enough, what he wanted was the smiley face. He wanted more highs and more bass because that's what he thought was good. I failed to ask questions about what he was actually expecting from performance. I only asked of what he was used to. So when you look at this list of expectations, it's really critical to judge yourself if you're an end user or if you're a retailer, to make sure you ask your customer what type of music do they listen to. How do you like this car? How do you like the sound that I'm presenting now? To try to get an idea of what those performance expectations are. Because I learned the painful way that I had to go back in and castrate one of the best sounding systems ever. To make it more what the customer was looking for. So this slide is really important, and I don't mind spending a couple extra minutes just talking about establishing realistic expectations. And it's not just buying the best gear you can possibly afford, because that may not really be what you're looking for. So.
And I think, if you're a consumer going to a retailer, the more info you can provide them, that's not just bland, I want it loud. Like Kevin said, louder than what? Tell them, what have you had in the past? I had 210s. Okay, you had 210s. You want more bass? Maybe we can look at 212s or 310s. Like, give the retailer the information to work with so they can make sure they pick the best products to suit, the vehicle, the application, all the stuff Kevin's going to talk about. So, our retailers need to do a good job of asking these questions, but as a consumer, you also need to make sure if you're dealing with a retailer or, an online vendor of ours, that you provide the info so they can give you the correct recommendations for product to get the goals, so you don't pull a Steve and
exactly. Don't do what Steve
killer
did.
system to a guy that just wanted it loud and fun.
Right, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that, and
No.
that's another key point for retailers. Don't project your opinions on your customers' preferences. So just because you think it's way too much bass doesn't mean that they do. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, it's always the easy one for me, and I'm sure Rob has hit
Barry
this
just said it.
100 billion times, is the guy listened to a system that you just completed maybe a week or so ago, and it was his buddy's system, and he comes in and says, I want it to be louder than Joe's Camaro.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, we know what that system is.
Because we did that
What
one, right?
it is. Are you just looking to be louder in the mids and the mains, or are you looking to be louder on the bass? And it becomes a very simple conversation, and that's the easiest one to have because you know where you're started from, and you have a good starting point there. But if you don't, like you guys said, man, you gotta give them the information. You can't make a good plan without all of the data, for sure. And getting the data starts off for me from the install perspective is the electrical system of the vehicle. So before we know what we can plan and what we can put into the vehicle, we got to understand what we have for an option. And I know a lot of retailers do this with the integration portion of it. They'll walk out to the vehicle and take a look and see what receivers in the dash and all of that stuff. But we also got to look at the electrical system. So that way we know exactly what we have the ability to put into the vehicle with needing upgrades or not needing upgrades on there. And when we take a look at the wiring and the electrical system of a vehicle, you have a battery, right? And the Steve, at one point in time, we were doing a School of Sound training, and it was just a very memorable one, the first one we ever did together. And he said, you have a battery, and it is just simply a storage unit. It sits there. It does not do a single thing until you hook something up to it.
Paperweight.
Right? So that battery's not going to run across the vehicle and start powering things up. You have to physically hook something to it for it to do its job. And the cars will have an alternator on there. And when we take a look, once that vehicle is started, the alternator is pretty much going to run everything off of the system from then on out. So you want to know what kind of alternators in the vehicle, what kind of battery that's in the vehicle. You want to know what kind of wiring those have on them from the factory too. Because if you're running a 1/0 from the battery back to the amplifiers, but the alternator to the battery is only an 8 gauge, you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So you need to keep that in mind. Everything has to scale down the line, or you're just going to be limited to whatever the smallest one is. Now, I won't get into the math on a lot of these things. When we take a look at the voltage and the voltage drops, we could get into a whole lot of time-consuming stuff there. There's this great book, the School of Sound book, that has a lot of that stuff available in it, and has a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about today in it too. And if Rob hasn't posted the link to that yet, he'll get it out to you guys here shortly.
We were too busy showing off our School of Sound books too. But I will jump in
here next to it.
I'll let you know that Glenn Savage already called us out for not having an augmented ground on that layout.
So here's Glenn, you jumped the gun on me here. So, and I'm glad I know he's on there. So I'm going to mention him down the line here a little bit. But the one thing is that especially in newer vehicles, when you're dealing with the grounds on here, even with older vehicles, we actually did some measurements in house, and Steve kind of explained this to me again at the first School of Sound that we did a long time ago. And we did some measurements on this, and the average frame will literally support a 4-gauge ground. So if you are going bigger than that for power wire, your return path has to be augmented, like Glenn said. And augmented just means that we're taking a wire and going from the battery directly to wherever we're connecting the main ground wire that you would see kind of on this picture here. So you're not necessarily taking that ground wire from the battery and going directly into the amplifiers. You're just going to the same point where the amplifiers are grounded. That way it can use the path of least resistance and get you back and running in that circular path for the electricity. So just keep that in mind. Newer vehicles, you have to be even more careful because a lot of them won't even support 4-gauge. And I know a lot of vehicles, especially newer trucks, they're using a lot of materials in the bodies of the trucks that won't allow the passage to be as easy as it once was too. Aluminum body pickup trucks, adding sound dampening material into the metals. So there's a lot of things that are going on these vehicles. It's just not as simple as it used to be. Honestly, if it's something that's newer, especially aluminum body vehicle, I don't even think about it. Even if it's a 4-gauge power wire that I'm running, I'll run a 4-gauge augmented ground on it just to be safe and not have to worry about it.
So let me jump in real quick, Kevin. So just for clarity, what Kevin's referring to is matching up with the primary wire. The testing that we did basically kind of played out that if you were running about 80 amps of current through the audio system, that's about what the return path can handle. So 80 amps of current, a 4-gauge wire, the length of a typical install, a 4-gauge wire is probably okay for an 80 amp main wire, but the chassis is only about as good as that 4-gauge wire at that point. And I know you guys are thinking if I'm using something less than that, then of course the current is less and you have less to worry about unless there's something in the chassis that's causing a degradation of current flow or some type of resistance. Like, Ford came out with a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, quiet steel. Quiet steel. What the heck is quiet steel? Well, basically what that is they put material into the steel to make it less noisy. And that damping material is non-conductive. So the chassis became less conductive. So we care about that. So my recommendation, Curtis actually mentioned it in the chat there. If you're running a 1-aught, run a 1-aught back. You're already in there. It's a big wire. Go ahead and give it a proper return path. And what Kevin was talking about is we're not saying to lift the ground point at the front. We're saying to tie them together with this new cable. And when you know about circuits, you know about series and parallel wiring. If you have a chassis and you take another wire and you put it on top of it, now you have a parallel path, and the electrons have a choice to either go through the superconductor, your new big thick wire, or the one that's got the perils of different weld spots or different materials that could hinder that performance. And in short, if you're running a big wire to the back, run a big wire back to the front every single time. Stop. All right, go. Done.
So real quick, while we're talking about this, we do have a question from Vernon asking about what about running ground from the negative battery terminal directly to the amps?
You don't want to go directly to the amplifiers. You always want to go to a point somewhere. I think the spec is 18 inches or whatever it is these days. I know it's changed a few times over the years and stuff, but you always want to you don't want to go ground directly from the battery into the amplifiers because it could, if you have a noisy electrical system, you could induce noise into the amplifiers through that ground path, and it's just not going to be great. So you always want to augment it rather than going straight in. And by augmenting is, like we said, on this picture that you see up here where the main ground wire gets connected to the chassis, just put it that ground wire right into that same area and you'll be good to go.
Especially if you do the big 3 upgrade and all of that, that'll help make sure
that was in the chat too, doing the big 3.
And honestly, you know what I normally do? Sorry. Yeah, we're going to make that hour.
We warned you.
You know what I honestly do is I'll use a lug and I'll actually take the ground wire a lot of times underneath the body of the vehicle, do it to the bottom of the lug, and then the lug comes up straight through, and then ground my amplifiers to that. So I'm getting a better chassis ground. I'm also giving a better body ground. I've upgraded the body ground at that point in time too, and then also to my amplifiers. So it makes it nice and easy, and it does kind of help you out a little bit with getting some other things running properly too. So one of the things that we do get a lot of is people are saying, if they see an amplifier, talking about grounds and stuff like that, if they see an amplifier shut down or whatever, a lot of times tech will say, well, measure, what's your voltage at the amplifier? And a lot of times you say 12 volts or 14 volts or 14.4 or 14.6, whatever it is. And you say, well, I don't see any drops, or it's only dropping a little bit. Well, I'll tell you this from personal experience, if you're reading a drop, especially on the ground at the amplifier itself, there's an issue somewhere in the line where you don't have a good ground and you want to go back through and check your connections. So even if it's a half a volt, it's huge.
Half a volt is like huge. Half a volt killed the dinosaurs, I think. Half a volt drop is significant on a high current device, without a doubt. So yeah, we as you could tell, we could speak about this exact slide for quite a long time. Suffice to say that power is your friend. Make sure the delivery is always consistent to whatever your performance demands are. And I think in a not too distant future, you're going to find a way of estimating what that current consumption may be from your performance expectations.
You are, but first we want to go through and we want to figure out what we have to work with. And this is fairly easy to determine. You could probably do some research online and it will kind of let you know what's going on and stuff like that. But you need to know what size amp alternator the car has. And we see Civics today with 100 amp alternators on them. So things have changed quite a bit, but the demands of the vehicle's electronics have also changed quite a bit too. So on that 180 amp alternator, you're going to have now power steering is electric. So you're going to have that on the line. They make some Civics that actually have electronic dampers on them. So you have to worry about that too. I think one of the suspensions I looked at actually had a 40 amp draw just for the suspension of the Civic. So there's a couple things that are on there that take up a lot of that open to buy amperage that the alternator is putting out. So you just take a look what amp alternator that you have in there, and you go through and see what the vehicle needs. What does the AC need? What do the computers need? Fuel pump, all of that stuff that's on there. And then you figure out what's left over. Normally it's going to be fairly minimal, maybe 30 amps or so.
And it makes sense because the load that the alternator puts on the engine kills fuel economy. So they want to put the smallest one on to cover their needs, and they don't really care what you want. They're not interested in anything that we want to add to the car. They want to cover what they've got and just maybe a little bit more. So that's it. So there's no doubt that it's going to be a very small number in most applications. Now we have found in a lot of the larger like SUVs or vehicles that have the ability to tow something, that you'll see a little bit of a buffer there because they know you're going to connect something else to it and they need to cover that. But Kevin's got a couple of things that he'll share with you about how to estimate what you really need, and then you can, kind of guide yourself accordingly on what you might need to do.
Right. And the EPA regulations have really got a lot to go electric. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why power steering went electric, because it was a parasitic loss off of the engine. Now it's electric and it can be a lot less of a parasitic loss off of the engine. So there is a lot of things that have converted over to electric. And that's why we see those larger alternators on those vehicles. I'm trying to think, I think the original Civics back in the day that were imported over had like a 60 amp or something like that on.
Yeah, it's really, really tiny, but they only needed like 50 amps of current for the whole vehicle, right? So,
right.
And sorry, I got to stop.
So estimating the current draw on there, and it's fairly easy to go through and do. And again, it's in the School of Sound book, but I'm going to walk you guys through it. The step one is multiplying the rated power by a percentage. So the percentages that we use, if it's an average listener, like myself, I would probably use 20%. If it's an abusive listener, somebody that really gets on it, I have a few friends that really come into mind already, they would use the 50% rule on there, or I would use the 50% rule for them. Then step 2 is you multiply step 1, so whatever you came up with from step 1, by a factor. And the factor is just what kind of amplifier are we using. So if you're using Class D high pass, you use a factor of 1.5. AB high pass or Class D low pass, factor of 2, and so on. And then step 3 would be divide that by the vehicle's voltage, and that will result in kind of an estimate that would be pretty close of what the current draw is. And I actually have an example here. So this example that we're stepping through here, we have a Class D sub-amp with 600 watts running at 12.5 volts, and it is an average listener. So we're going to use 20%. So when we do our first step, we come up with 120. So we take that 120 and we multiply it by the factor of 2 because we're using that Class D sub amplifier, and we get 240. Now we divide that by the amperage that's in the vehicle. We're going to go with 12.5 amps, and that gives us our 19.2 volts, 12.5 volts. And that gives us our 19.2 amps of expected current draw on there as an average. And that's going to be a pretty good average that we're going to look at. Now, if we take that same exact thing and we take an abusive listener, somebody that's really going to be getting on this system and really, really hauling on it all the time, then that expected average current goes all the way up to 48 amps. So it over doubles on there, 28.8 amp increase. So we just have to understand how the system is going to be used in the vehicle, and we can determine what equipment we can put in there with what we have, or if we need to upgrade it. And upgrading is not a bad thing. So just know what you're working with, know what you can put in there, and then know what you can put in there to upgrade to get you where you need to be to get those expectations on. And
here's a key point. As an end user, as the person who's going to be paying for all of this, you need to be honest with yourself. Lying here is only going to bite you in the butt at a different point. So if you don't think you're an abusive listener and you tell your salesperson, no, I'm never going to really play it like that, and they guide their choices accordingly, if you then are an abusive listener, you kind of did it to yourself at that point. So be honest, and it's okay. We're not trying to say you can't be abusive. You can be abusive. Let's just set up a system to be reliable for an abusive listener. And as Kevin, I think he did a really smart thing. He starts with electrical because that's where everything's going to start. One of the comments in the chat was no power, no sound. If you don't have power to deliver to an amplifier, the amplifier can't do its job. This is a key part of that. And Kevin chose to use a bass amplifier because I think we all understand that bass tends to be the most energy hungry. Mids and highs would be significantly less, orders of magnitude less in terms of what their expected current draw would be for any one of those amplifier channels. This is the monster, these big bass amplifiers that give you guys this performance that no doubt you're looking for. So be real, be honest with yourself, and plan accordingly.
And we have this quick chart that will also help out too, and it gets you pretty close. You can see if we take that same example and we take, we have a full range, or I'm sorry, not a full range, but we have a Class D amplifier that's a subwoofer amplifier. We're taking that and we have our per 100 watts. We just use the chart there at the bottom to go through. So if we have our 600 watts, 600 watt amplifier, we just use 6, and then we times that factor to get our amperage draw depending on what we're using. And then again, like Steve said, you can see that the factor is quite different. You know, we're using 3.2 here because we're saying it's going to be a normal listener. But if it's an excessive listener, we have to use the factor of 8. So just keep that in mind. And like he said, be honest with yourself. Know how you're going to listen to it and understand it. I'm a pretty average listener, but there's sometimes I like to get on it. You know, I'm having a nice drive. But for the most part, I will be that average listener. So just be honest with yourself. Know where you're going. And that way you can plan it out properly. So like Steve said, once we know what we can work with and we know kind of how things are going with the power and some of the comments on Facebook there, now we can start getting into choosing the right gear, and we know what we have to work with, and that's a great start. And I'm going to start off personally with the subwoofer, because honestly, that's probably what most of us would go in and add. But keep in mind that subwoofer is playing 80 hertz down to 20 hertz, and that's only 2 of the 10 octaves that we can hear, or 20%. So now, personally, for me, they're the funnest 20%.
No doubt about that.
That is just my opinion.
You can't really do hair tricks with tweeters.
Right.
Kevin does beard tricks. He doesn't have hair for hair tricks.
If you could do beard tricks, I want to see that system.
It might be Glenn Savage.
Good point. And he's got the beard too, so.
Yeah. Glenn's definitely got a better beard for that than I do. So choosing the right gear, and Steve touched on this earlier, and I'm just going to have a quick touch back, and we're going to touch on this as we go down. It's not always the most expensive or what your buddy has. Choosing the right gear really is what's going to fit your needs and your expectations and your goals. So when we go in and we start talking about choosing a subwoofer, and meeting those expectations, we want to get the performance, but we also want to make sure we're getting the reliability out of it too. If you try to force something to do what it isn't intended to do, then you are going to end up compromising something, and it's normally the reliability. So we want to figure out what fits and what fits not only with the expectations, but what physically fits in that vehicle too. If you get a driver that's not made to be used in a real small, tight airspace, you're probably not going to get the performance that you need if you're trying to put that in a very small area. If you don't have the depth or you don't have the width, you have to think about all these things and take them into account when you are designing that system. And then obviously you have to make it fit within a budget too. But the application is really, really what is going to determine it. And personally, and I say this because I am the installer guy, what fits the vehicle and what fits the application that's going to meet your goals is way more important than what the budget is. And that is a personal little deal for me. But I know we do have budgets that we do have to work with, but make sure that you are taking into account the other side of it too.
Kevin, that comment about the budget being less important than the form factor of what fits in the vehicle, I'm pretty sure, although I haven't seen anything in the chat, that you might get some pushback on that. Some people say, well, I can't afford to do all this high-end crazy stuff. Well, maybe you can, but there's a very delicate balance on a lot of this stuff. While it may be physically possible to fit gigantic speakers that are really expensive in there, it may not perform any better for your performance expectations. Scaling back allows your installer to do a better fit and finish and maybe even get better performance than those larger speakers. A pair of 15s in the back of a sedan versus 3/8. People say 15s all day long, but the aperture, the energy getting from the trunk into the main part of the vehicle, 15s are going to be somewhat compromised in most applications because it's a huge box blocking a lot of that. The 8s actually may outperform the 15s, and you can make it look a lot better too. So in those applications, budget, it's where you allocate the budget. It's not the total expenditure. It's where you put the money. That's a really good point you brought up.
And it just brings up, and that also brings up, like, maybe your expectations or your goals aren't something that requires a big budget. You know what I mean? Like you might want to just do one 12-inch or one 8-inch in the back of a vehicle and with 500 watts or 300 watts on it. And that meets your expectation and your goals. That's not going to be a huge budget. So again, what's going to fit the vehicle for me is more and what's going to fit your expectations. Now, if you have expectations of a Lamborghini and you have a Honda Civic budget, you're going to have a compromise at some point.
Those are fighting words for Eric Cole right there. Kevin, you touched on something I got to share. So you talked about using like a single 12 or something like that. It's my suggestion. And remember, I do work for a manufacturer. We make money by selling our product to you, and hopefully it works really well and you keep buying it. But I'll be honest with you, I'd rather you buy a single woofer with a smaller amplifier than a bigger amplifier with multiple speakers. I'd rather you start small and expand than put too much stuff in there and be disappointed. We can always expand. We can always add to your system and make it better over time. But if there's a balancing act that we have to do, the thing that I don't want to do is compromise on performance and reliability, because quite honestly, life's too short. Let's get a really great sounding audio system in there, get it dialed in so that it works really well, fits your performance expectations, and doesn't break. And if you come back and say, hey, Steve, I'm looking for more, well, I could do more.
Right.
Doing less is a compromise, and we're scaling back, and you'll be disappointed. So start with a single 12. And if you want a second 12, get another amp, another box, another 12. We can add that, no problem. But trying to cram 15s in where they're not going to work out too well, that's not a good idea. That's just a bad approach to system design. So at this point, I think says a lot. Why don't you cover this, and it may explain kind of what we're talking about here, Kevin.
I think he was trying to before he was interrupted.
Yeah, well, we cautioned everybody, so.
Well, it's a fun topic for us to all talk about. And this was actually, when I put this together, this chart, we all shared it. And light bulbs just kind of went off with everybody, and they kind of went off in different areas too. I want to say, I did some output potential comparisons, and this is potential, so just keep that in mind. We're really looking at the piston displacement total. How much potential for output can we have? And I wanted to kind of keep it nice and in the same realm as one another. So if you look at the piston displacement, I'm right around 200 cubic inches, a little more, a little less here and there. And that was kind of my goal, was to stay right in that realm. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can get that much potential for output. One 12W7AE will give you 193.21 cubic inches. Doesn't have as much surface, cone surface area on there, but it makes it up with excursion. And that movement of in and out for the excursion really makes up that displacement total. And that displacement total is how much air we can move in cubic inches with the given amount of area that we have to work with. So keep that in mind. That is how much area, or how much air we can compress and rarefy with the drivers that we're looking at. Now, what's that?
I love this slide because it gets out of this mentality that I used to see when I worked in retail, that like, oh, I want a lot of bass, I have to have a W7. No, that's not the case. I love that you showing, like, everyone always would be like, oh, I don't want the W1 V3 series. It's not going to be enough bass. Well, when you design the system the right way, right. And we've been preaching in a lot of our trainings lately, multiple drivers instead of one to, spread the power, more displacement. That is a system that's going to be those, 4 to 10 TW1s if you have the room, which little larger than the W7, but, it's workable in a lot of vehicles, I think. You'll have the same output pretty much, a more reliable system because we're spreading all of that power across 4 voice coils, as we discussed in When Good Woofers Go Bad. And it looks cool. It just looks cool when you have multiple, especially when you get to 3 and 4. So you don't always have to have the big bad boy that costs ridiculous amount of money to get like expensive. You can go with entry level priced products. And I hate calling TW or 10W1s entry level because they're far from it, but they're one of our least expensive woofers. So that entry level in terms of price, I guess. But you don't have to have the most expensive stuff to get loud, especially when you start getting smart with your design and thinking about multiple drivers. And that also then opens up money for you to further invest into the upgrades you may need for your power wire. You'll probably, maybe it's a less expensive amplifier, sound damping material. So, don't always think you need the biggest and baddest to get loud. You can do multiple of less expensive products and then use that money to further enhance the rest of the system. And this chart proves you can get that output by following that path.
And you can get that output in different applications. So maybe you have a pickup truck where you can't fit a 12W7 AE? Well, you can put 3 10TW3s underneath the rear seat, or in the underneath the rear deck of a vehicle, so you're not taking up that much space on there. And the airspace is very, very close to one another. You're looking at 1.375 to 1.5 cubic feet. It's not a huge difference on there, but you can fit 10TW3s in a lot more places than you can fit a 12W7 AE. So keep that in mind. And when you're looking at the design, and Steve hit home with this a few weeks ago on actually when we were doing, it might have been Rob, when we were doing the TW1 training on there. You look at the depth of the subwoofer, but you also have to look at how far the extension of the subwoofer off of the face is too. So a 12W7 AE, 9.5-inch mounting depth, but you also are going to have quite a bit of room that you're going to need to leave in front of the driver too, where like a 12 TW1 has that recessed cone in a little bit, so you don't need that much room. So there's a lot of different applications that you're going to run into, and a lot of different things that you just kind of need to think about when you do it. One of the cool things that I thought with this, and I did the power handling total for all of these, is you pretty much need 700 or 750 to 1,000 watts to push that much piston displacement. No matter how you look at it, no matter which way you kind of divide it up, you need about that much power. And the cool thing is, like Rob says, is you can divide that much power up over 4 drivers, and you're getting a lot less.
Which is a really smart thing to do. Bear in mind, though,
building up on
these are all based on our power recommendations, so it may not track everybody else, but within the realm of what Kevin's sharing with you here, it was really interesting to see for about 1,000 watts of power, you got lots of ways of skinning this cat. You can do lots of different things, and all of them are going to have roughly the same level of potential output. There are differences in terms of the sound from each one of the drivers, and that, frankly, that's where the W7, that's where it gets its legs. If it's just about loud, what Kevin is sharing with you is gold. If you got the power, spread it over multiple numbers of drivers, and if the 10s don't ring the bell for you, go to 12s. You need a bigger box, right? But the W7s and the W6s, I would reserve those to the customer that's actually going to truly appreciate the sound quality aspect that those can bring. If all they want is loud, I'm going to try. I might fail, but I'm going to try to talk them into a W3V3 or the TWs if space is a bit tight. I'm going to try to talk them into a more normal woofer than the ultra high-end, high performance, and of course, high output single driver. It's a smarter system the way Kevin's explaining it.
And it's funny that you bring up the W3V3s, because I actually did the kind of same comparison with the W3V3s. And keep in mind, these are our specifications, and we kind of try to keep them as true to form as possible. If you're looking at something else, they may not measure out the same way. Just make sure that you're understanding the measurements that you're looking at. If it's JL, then obviously we know what we're looking at here. If it's somebody else, just make sure you understand what you're looking at when you're looking at those specifications. Not just with power handling, but with excursion and all of that too. So W3, V3, I did a comparison with those, and it was pretty interesting, because if you go to 6 W3 V3s, you have the same piston displacement as 1 8 W3 V3. And if you do 2 8 W3 V3s, you have the same piston displacement as 1 10 W3 V3. And it kind of scales up. The 12 is the oddball in there. It doesn't double going to the 12, but that's why there's a 13 W3 V3 in there, because it does scale up. If you do 2 10s, it is the same piston displacement, or very, very close, as 113 W3 V3. And you may have the room for one or the other. Again, it just depends on what you have. But it's kind of a cool thing, because a lot of times you hear people saying, oh, 2 8s equals a 10, 2 10s equals a 12, and so on, 2 12s equals a 15. This kind of gives you that chart and that comparison, so you can see exactly what you are working with the potential for output. And I did the W3 V3 because it is such the cool line, and it's a very go-to line, and it's the broadest line that we had to give you the most steps to be able to see that on there. Now, this won't scale when you go to, or may not scale when you go to other lines. So again, just keep that in mind. But you give you an idea. Look at the piston displacement, the SD, which is the surface area of the cone, your excursion, and then if they don't give you total piston displacement, you can calculate that out pretty easy, and then you can do your comparisons that way. So, do you need a shallow driver? Most mounting depth most times mounting depth can be an issue, especially if you're dealing with trucks or anything like that. But then how much mounting depth issue do you really have? Obviously, in the back of like this Dodge pickup truck, we couldn't put a W7 in there, but TW3s will work fine. But
well, you could, but it wouldn't look anything as good as that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But sometimes TW3s aren't even able to fit in there. So that's why we have a TW5 V2 in there. So like I said, maybe you don't have the width going across like we do in this picture. So maybe then TW1 is a great example for you. So you have to take a look at the vehicle application base. And I know we tout this all the time, but we make a lot of products that are great application products. And they do have a use for them. So that's where we kind of look at all of that. You know, when you look at the shallow line, we have 3 different shallow woofers that meet 3 different types of applications on there. And then we have lines of regular drivers too. Maybe you don't need a shallow driver, but you need something that has a very small enclosure and works in a very small airspace, but you only have room for one, so you need a lot of excursion. Well, W6 fits that bill to the T. So, you know, we have these great different applications of drivers. And yes, a lot of times we buy something because we think that specific driver sounds good. Each one will present itself tonally a little bit differently, especially when you get into the W7. But getting something that fits is the key in there. And now, once we fix or pick a subwoofer, we need to make sure that we have an enclosure that's going to fit in that area too. So they go hand in hand with one another so tightly that you're going to have to process both of them at the same time when you are designing that for the vehicle. We take a look at these enclosures here, and you'll see I say generally next to all of these.
Covering your butt.
What's that?
I said you're covering your butt.
Yeah, I'm covering my butt because generally is realistically, these are pretty across the board, but you have to build the enclosure properly for them to be taken into account too.
Right. So the point is that within any given line of product, in general terms, everything that he's sharing here tends to be true. There are always going to be outliers, and we just wanted to avoid people. Well, in the blah 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 line that we found, we get it. We know that there's outliers, but generally speaking, sealed enclosures are going to be smaller. They tend to be more accurate, and they typically will cost less when you go to have them fabricated.
Yeah, you have less cost or less materials, less design time on them, and all of that. Now, vented enclosures are normally more efficient on there, and they do have the potential for more output also on them. But there's one glaring elephant in the room between these two enclosures. These are both 12W7 AE drivers. One of these is probably going to fit in more areas than the other one.
No doubt about it.
So, and that's your difference between your sealed and your ported enclosures there. So you need to pick one that is going to fit which application. Now, I use both. Actually have a ported enclosure in my office on a W3, and I have a sealed enclosure in my truck because I'm using a TW5, which only works in a sealed enclosure. So it's application based. It's what fits and what you are looking for output on there also. Now, there are others enclosures. I know Glenn's probably, if he's still on with us, he's probably saying, hey, what about this this enclosure and all of that? There are other ones out there.
You're dead on. He's yelling at us about having an infinite baffle sub. So you're like almost in time, exactly when you were saying that.
So we're going to just stick to these two. They're your two main ones that we're going to work with. There are other outliers out there, and there may be something that comes down the line that may discuss those too. So keep that in mind. If you are going to use a prefabricated enclosure, we have our CP108 that you see up here on the board. This enclosure is specifically made for this driver. Now, if you're using a prefabricated enclosure that is not specific to the driver, you need to make sure that you are matching up the airspace on there. Most times, prefabricated enclosures that are general prefabricated enclosures meet more of the demands of something in the middle, not for a specific driver. They try to cover as many as they can, and they may or may not work properly for the driver that you want to choose for that vehicle. And then it gets even more difficult if you're trying to do a ported prefabricated enclosure that's just a general one, because then the tuning and everything else, and it just becomes a little bit convoluted on there. So just make sure that you're using the right drive or the right enclosure for the right subwoofer. One of the cool things about this CP108 box is this is an 8-inch driver, and we take a look at this and all of the bracing that is in this enclosure. And this is a great enclosure. If you guys haven't heard them, definitely take a listen to them. They are amazing little guys. Not only is that bracing on there, but those braces are actually dadoed in. You can see along the top line there into the vent and also into the enclosure too, to give it that extra support. It's not just glued butt joints going on there. They're actually cut into the enclosure, recessed in, and really giving it a lot of rigidity. So if we do this for an 8, think about what we're doing for a 13. I mean, you do have to really take into consideration how these enclosures are built and make sure that they are built to the T. This was a great one that Mark from Car Idea Fabrication sent in. He built this for a 12W1, and we take a look at the dual face on this. And it's not dual face where the subwoofer mounts, but that secondary outside piece there is really going to add a lot of rigidity to the face of that enclosure. And then if you peek inside it, you can see that he has bracing in there too. And again, that's for a W1 driver. Anything that is lost or any movement in the enclosure is potential output that is being taken away. So you want to make sure that those enclosures are built well, whether you're building it yourself, whether you're having it built for you, or whether you're using a prefabricated enclosure. You want to make sure that they're built well and make sure that you're maximizing the performance of the driver on there too. So lost energy is going to be lost performance, and you don't want your enclosure to be losing the performance for you. So now that we have an idea of our amperage, we talked about the subwoofer that we're going to use, enclosures. What kind of amplifiers are we going to go and look at? Well, when we go through and we choose our amplifiers, we want to choose one that's going to play nice with the subwoofer and the electrical system in the vehicle. That's why it was so important to start off with knowing the electrical system of the vehicle, knowing what kind of user that we are going to be when we're playing all of that stuff. But then when we measure it out with the subwoofer, we also need to make sure it plays nice, not only with power, but impedance on there also. One of the biggest, most clicked on Help Center articles is wiring for dual voice coils and figuring out impedance of subwoofers. So make sure that you are matching them up. If you're not sure, there's tons of articles out there that can do it, or talk to somebody that's a little bit more knowledgeable on there.
Just for the record, you do need to use both coils.
Yes, you do. Yes, you absolutely do. So when we get in and we want to take a look at the rest of the system too, are we using a system amplifier? So is it going to be like a 5-channel amplifier that we're going to use? Or are we going to use a separate full range and subwoofer amplifiers in the system? And we can go through and design those separately. And the last but not least, which has become very, very popular over the past few years, is DSP or no DSP. Are we going to utilize a DSP in the amplifier or not? Or are we going to use a separate processor? Does the vehicle already have some DSP in it? If it does, then you probably should be putting DSP in the equipment that you're putting back in it, or you're going to start losing some compromises over what you removed from the factory system. Now we have all of these nice, great power charts for our subwoofers. I know sometimes some people think
those?
that they may be a little confusing on there because it's just not one power rating. We don't just come out and say, hey, you put 500 watts on this subwoofer. We give you this really, really cool power chart that kind of shows you where you want to be on there, and give you a variety of amplifiers that you can choose from in those power needs that are going to meet your goals and meet what your car has to offer too. So we want to take those all into mind, not just what the subwoofer can handle. When we take a look at the 12W3V3 up top there, it is a 2 ohm driver. So if you're using like an XD601, you're going to put a lot of heat into that voice coil, which may make it look the same color as where the arrow is pointing at. So just keep that in mind. Batch them up. We give you a lot of options up there. You don't have to maximize and put the biggest amplifier that's recommended on every single driver that you use. So you have a leeway in there. Use that leeway, because when we take a look at it and when we take a look at the power and what you're going to get, this is very, very powerful. When we take a look at the 2 times the power equals 1.41 voltage, which gives you about a 50% excursion increase of the driver, which is going to give you 3 dB. And when we break that down into smaller terms, going from a 300 watt amplifier to a 600 watt amplifier may not be that big of a deal, but it's also not going to give you that, holy cow, that was way more bass than what I had before. A lot of receivers these days have clicks on the volume knob that go by dB. So you can just take your receiver and click it up 3 dB and understand that, wow, I can hear that it's louder, but it's not earth-shattering, hair-raising difference that I'm expecting by doubling my power. Your alternator, on the other hand, is going to say, whew, you just doubled the power.
Doubling the power for a given voltage, like a 12-volt system, to double the power, you would need twice the current. Voltage times current gives you the power, right? So for a given system, if you're pulling 30 amps of current for an amplifier and you double that amplifier's output power, you now need 60 amps of current.
Yep.
Can you get that? Most of the times you can't.
It may not be that big of a deal, like I said, if you're going from 300 watts to 600 watts. But if you have 1,000 watt amplifier in there and you want to go to 2,000 watts, most cars are not going to be able to sustain that without major upgrades for 3 dB. So again, you don't have to use the maximum output. By adding another driver in there, you're going to get that same 3 dB. And you're going to be a lot happier, and your electrical system is going to be a lot happier on there too. So stepping into the full range speakers, when we take a look at the expectations, we got to think, do we want to have a great sound stage on there? Do we want to sit in a car and be as it would be listening to live music? Or do we want something that's just going to tear our face off? Do we want the smiley face that's going to have highs that
technical term there, huh?
make me cringe on there a little bit too? Or do we want something in the middle that does a little bit of both in there? And we also have to figure out what's going to fit the vehicle, because again, we can make plates, we can do things, but there's an additional cost that is going to be there. So what fits the vehicle and what our expectations are going to be. And then last but not least, we have our budget on there. Now we can notice, we take a look at these speakers. We have our C2 650 at 60 watts. We have our C3 650 at 75 watts. And we have our C5 650 at 75 watts also. You'll notice that they're all very close to one another in power, because when you start getting into these way more efficient speakers, the power changes don't make as big of a difference as when you're dealing with a subwoofer on there. And honestly, 100 watts to a tweeter, you're going to have a hard time keeping up with the rest of the speakers in there because that tweeter is so small and so efficient. It's going to be tearing your face off at 100 watts.
Most of the time, you only need a couple of watts to really make a tweeter do what it needs to do. So, the rating on when you're going active, the ratings on tweeters and stuff, don't even look at it. Just when you take, I would hope if you're going active, you have a DSP. And
you need to have a DSP.
Kind of not much of a choice these days. You can do an analog system, but digital's the way to go for sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, so you can do it with the bandpass feature on the XD-V25 channels, but you don't have the control. So, like with the DSP, you can use the level to lower the tweeters and balance it to the mid-range. So as long as your input signal's not clipping, don't worry too much about what's going to the tweeters, because I guarantee you when you tune the system, you're going to turn those down so they're balanced with the mid-range. Even if you like the smiley face, you're still going to attenuate them somewhat because they are going to make you want to rip your ears out.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. And these really do fit a lot of applications. Somebody who just cares about sheer output compared to fidelity, they may not care about a C7 or a C5. Maybe they would rather have 2 sets of C2s in there or 2 sets of C3s that are going to give them a little bit more output. And like Rob said, if you're not interested in DSP, or even Steve there, if you're not interested in DSP, then the C7 may not be a talking point at that point either. So since they don't come with any passive networks. And the cool thing is that if you are getting into DSP, we're actually offering more and more of these lines without that passive network, because we understand that if you're using DSP, you're probably going to want to run them active to get the most performance out of them.
And we all know DSP has become an important part of system layout and design. So in 2 years from now, we may not even have that part of the presentation in there. It's DSP because almost everything's going to have it. Some really funny comments in the chat. I know you can't really see it right now, Kevin, but where did it go? Someone says 50 watts RMS to tweeters is an A-bomb, and he's right. Curtis follows that up with the classic one. I want dogs 5 streets over to hear the tweeters, which is quite amusing. I bring them up only because tweeters get loud without very much power at all. So everything Kevin's saying is, when you're dialing in your system, you want to make sure that you're dialing it in so that you're getting the maximum clean output from the amplifier first. Then you're going to tone everything down so that the system is balanced and not screaming bloody murder at you. And everything that Kevin said is exactly great advice. Get the power that you need and put it where it needs to be. Tweeters don't need a whole lot. If you need more high frequency, I would add more tweeters because you already have enough power. I don't know what amp you got, but you got more than enough power for your tweeters. It's something that's a bit uncomfortable to discuss openly. The power ratings on a lot of main speakers, the full range products that we're talking about, with rare exceptions, are all truthfully about the same. 50 to 125 watts of power for almost any main speaker that you're ever likely to see. So when you start trying to put 400, 500, 600 watts to each one of them, you're getting into that black area of that power chart. And that's why we have that there. We don't want you to do that. If you're trying to get more performance out of these smaller drivers, more power is not the way to do it. Get more of them. And my last comment, I'll let Kevin continue on. When you start looking up the higher level of our range and other companies' ranges as well, most of the time what you're buying isn't better power handling or even more reliability. You're getting more finesse and fidelity, which goes back to some of the earlier slides that Kevin had. What are your performance expectations? If you're only listening to bass music that really doesn't have a whole lot of content up there anyway, spending high dollars on C5 or C7 level product is probably a foolish thing to do. You don't need that level of detail and finesse. As a matter of fact, you may not even want that level of detail and finesse because it's too clean. You might be better off with a product that's going to be a little bit more aggressive for you and probably handle power a little bit better for you as well. My favorite, honestly, is C3. Most customers love the C3. They play really loud. They're a bit more aggressive in their tonality as well. They handle rock music, rap music, electronic music really, really effectively. No, they're not quite as refined as a C5 or a C7, but most people don't care about that. They want it loud. They want it to sound really good, and C3 level product will fit the bill. Same is true for other companies as well. I've listened to a lot of them. They're higher level product. You're paying for finesse and detail. If that's not part of your performance expectations, I would shift that money to something that maybe is more in your performance expectation. I'll be quiet again. Sorry.
That's actually, it's a great point. It's not just about your expectations, but it's like the content you listen to. If you're listening to a lot of heavily compressed content, whether it's satellite radio or lower quality MP3s, a C7 type product wouldn't be worth it. But a C3, which is voiced a little more aggressively in the upper mid range and high frequency, so it's, you know, the more fun speaker, if you will, that will bring that music back to life. That's a speaker that will make that subpar content sound really good, or, you know, something more refined higher up. You're not getting what you're paying for because the source material is not great, and it's not going to help enhance it like a more, I guess you could say, a more aggressive speaker like C3s would. So it's interesting. It's not just your listening style, but the content as well.
Yeah, I've not listened to AM radio on my C7s yet to see how that performance is there, but I will.
Sadly, I have. Got to get my sports talk radio in every once in a while.
So let's talk about the power distribution. How are we looking at power divided up between our subwoofer power and our satellite power and systems? This slide was this presentation was done quite a long time ago, where there were more systems that were under 500 watts of total power. There's not too many systems out there that you're going to get into that are under 500 watts total power. So we're going to stick to the ones that are over 500 watts total power, and a 70-30 percentage, 70% being to the subwoofer, 30% being to the satellite power is a great way to look at that. And I have a couple systems up here that we're looking at. We have VXI 1001 or 1000/1i and a VX 800/8i on there. And the power ratio is 62-38. So we're very, very good with that. And then the same with the HDs. We have an HD 751 and an HD 604, and our power ratio is 55-45 on there. So very, very close to one another. You're going to have a great performance and a great mixture between both of these. You're not going to be lacking on your mid-range drivers or anything like that. Now, there are poorer versions of this too. Like if you had an HD 1201 and you're using a factory speakers on there, those factory speakers at 20 watts on a good day probably aren't going to keep up with that HD 1201. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep that balance throughout the system. Now, if you're building the system in stages, then it's not such a bad thing. But just keep that in mind. If your end result is having a good balanced sound, then these percentages are where you want to be in.
Yeah, I remember I was on the road a couple years ago at a dealer who was doing an install, and it was a mix of our product and someone else's product. And they had, it was a Hummer H2, 213 W7s on someone else's. They had like two 2,000 watt amplifiers, and then an XD 400/4 on two pairs of ZRs. And I'm like, wait a minute, you have 4,000 watts for your bass and a 4x75 at 4 ohm amplifier for your mids. What do you think is going to happen to those mids and highs? They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, there's going to be so much bass. They're going to turn it up, and you're just going to run out of juice. Like, so that's where, you have to be smart. You can still do a system like that, but then maybe you move to an 8-channel amp and bridge it down to a 4-channel. So we have that extra headroom in the amplifier. Or in a perfect world, we add more speakers, and then that will help overcome the ridiculous amounts of bass 213 W7s on that type of power would bring out. But, this is where stuff like this, not following this power ratio, is a classic example of how products fail in the field. Mainly your full range speakers in the doors, whether they're factory or aftermarket, because they just can't keep up. And then we try to push them harder, and they hit their limits. So be smart with these power ratios. This is a great way to keep your system running.
Yeah, that's when you're going in and you're changing your mid and your treble up on your receiver and boosting all of that stuff to try to get your mids to somewhat keep up with those subwoofers, and you're just causing yourself reliability issues. That's where
It's a
you're
really good point, Kevin, and I love what you said, because we can apply that to our customers as well as our retailers. As a customer, if you find yourself turning up the treble, the mid-range, or the bass, what you're basically saying is, I need more of this.
Yeah.
It's not sufficient for me. And as a retailer, if someone comes in and you see that they're doing that, you could go in and say, I see what's going on. You feel that we need more bass. We could do that for you. And we can. And, Rob and Kevin have already talked about lots of different ways of doing that. And I need to be quiet because we're already going really long. But this power ratio does work out really, really well. The 60-40, 70-30 thing, as a general rule of thumb, it works out really, really well.
It does. All right, so we're going to cruise through some system designs here. I have this system I laid out personally. I'd like to build this system. This is a pretty cool system. Two HD 751s, a VX 808i, which I would do like a C7, on that, bridge the mids off of that 800i, and then a 404 to run my rear speakers on there. That's a really nice system. Power ratio is good. Everything's laid out on there. And on paper, that looks really, really good. But what happens if we're trying to put that system into a Honda Civic? And I apologize, Eric Cole, for all of the Civic comments that I've made throughout this training.
It's a great example, though, because it's a vehicle that doesn't have the most robust charging system.
Right. So if we're trying to put this in that Honda Civic and we take a look at our current draw, an average listener with that system would be 65 total amps of current on there, which is a lot to ask that little guy on there. Now, if we take that up one notch, which I'm an abusive listener, I hear everybody laughing. We have 163 total amps of current draw, and I can assure you that is not spare laying around in the charging system.
No, I guarantee it.
On a Civic there.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate real quick. And, when we get to that abusive listener, we were just talking about how the main speakers and high frequency ones are probably less demanding. So even if you shaved a little bit off of the top, and let's bring this down to 150 amps of current, or even 125 amps of current, you were already pushing it at 65. Yeah. So now you're over 100. The point is, design systems that are going to work for the vehicle. We'll come back to this in a summary, but that's what I'm taking away from that one.
Yeah. And so I use this F350 here. I personally had one, and it had dual 200 amp alternators in it with dual batteries and huge power wire. I mean, everything was laid out in it from the factory. I wasn't towing a trailer all the time. I didn't have a snow plow on the front of it. Like, I wasn't using all of that stuff. I just optioned it out with the dual alternator package on it because I knew the system I was going to put in it. So this would be able to hold up to that and be able to play those pretty decent. Even with an abusive listener, you would be pretty close and pretty good on that system there.
Big wires and lots of them.
Right. But what if that person wants to put two 13W7AEs in there?
Let them.
Are they going to be able to fit them? So again, we need to look at all of the components and be able to design a system that is going to fit that specific vehicle properly. And Rob made a joke about, just put them in a blow through in the bed. I'm not a person who's going to cut out, especially an aluminum bed, out of my vehicle to do a blow through, and I use the truck quite a bit. So design it not only for the vehicle, for the electrical system, but what's going to fit properly in the vehicle and meet those expectations on there, which brings me to the installation portion of it. Integration. I'm not going to get into how to install and all of the integration here in this specific training. There's additional things that would be going on with basic installation too, but I wanted to touch on some of the major ones. Integration, no matter how you do it, it needs to be done. Whether it's a high-level input into the amplifier, whether you're using an LOC22, a fix, or any of the other options that are available out there, you need to get signal to your amplifier, so that is a must. Wiring, you need to have wiring going to your amplifiers. So you can't just throw the amplifier in the trunk and screw it to a board and expect it to turn on. You have to have stuff going on to get power to those amplifiers. Then you need wiring to go from the amplifiers to your speakers. You may need some adapters in there for your speakers also. So keep that in mind, whether it's a Ford pickup truck and they were 5x7s or 6x9s in the doors, or Dodge pickup trucks, and you're putting a 6.5 in there, you're going to need some sort of adapter in there. And you're going to want to do some sort of sound damping in there also. And last but not least, you're going to do some tuning, and whether that tuning entails, you're going to have to do some, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second.
So go back to the previous slide for a second.
Yep.
Yeah, with all that stuff on there. I have a little aside here that I just want to touch on. Everything that Kevin has on this slide here is vital to your installation. And what bothers me is, like, when you go to buy a new car, they charge extra for floor mats. Floor mats should be part of the system, right? So when you're looking to spec out your system, allow some money for the integration that may be needed, because it's going to cost something, right? There's going to be some kind of expense, some higher, some lower, but allow for that. Wires, nothing works without them. You need to account for all of that. The sound damping, the tuning, all of this is part of the system. So don't spend all your budget in those W7s and just expect it all to work. It needs an amp, it needs a box, it needs wires, it needs all of this stuff. So always allow for that. Don't sell them separately necessarily. It's all part of the package. And as a customer, you should expect that all of this be part of the system that you're purchasing, and account for it. That is part of it. 100%. It doesn't work without it.
Nope.
And don't just also like go cheap on some of this stuff. If you have if you have a budget and, I can get this 12W7, but I can only afford that cheap copper clad aluminum wire. Well, now your amp's not going to get the current it probably needs to properly power the W7. So now you've compromised your performance plus, other potential issues. So this is a lot of stuff where I'll see people. And when I worked in retail, it was like that, where you want the most expensive amp sub speaker and you kind of cheap out on the accessories, but the accessories can be very detrimental to the system if we don't get proper components in there that can rob performance, cause current or voltage issues in the vehicle, rattles with the dampings. So, this is very important stuff that you need to factor in. And that means maybe lowering the actual end game product, the speakers, amps, and subs. Do it, because you're going to get better performance with a lower level product and putting the right money into these components than you would if you just put the top-notch stuff in the car and then all the cheap accessories. So, it all comes together.
It does. It really does. So I just want to clear up some verbiage here real quick. We're going to talk about damping, and that's, if you look how it's pronounced, damping, and that is decreasing of the amplitude of an electrical or mechanical wave. Now, not to be confused with dampening, which is damp. And that's a verb, which is to get something moist or wet or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. They are two separate entities.
Damping is what you do when you don't want something to vibrate. Dampening is what happens when you throw it in the pool. Right?
The water you go on.
So yes, tuning is part of the installation, and to reach a consistent goal of fidelity, whether it is a super high end goal or whether it's an average goal, you're going to need to tune the system. And it's not just DSP. I know when we talk about tuning, everybody thinks, oh, DSP. But if you're adjusting the high pass filter on the amplifier, you're doing tuning. So you've got to keep that in mind, that you do have to have some sort of tuning in there once you get the system in and running. And we take a look. This is just a basic curve. This is just any old curve. You don't need to utilize this one. Use something that you think sounds good and go ahead and tune to that specific curve. If you're a dealer, you probably have some sort of tool that will allow you to do that. If you're an end user and you want to go through and take a look, audio tools for iPhones is $20 and it works really, really well and will get you kind of in a ballpark realm there. But you need to have some sort of end point to go to, right? And you
it's
got
hard
your
to curve.
equipment in there, you got everything laid out, and it's not just going to be turn it on and everything works. You have to go in and make some adjustments to get that to sound good and to get everything to work together properly. And by having this, you can visually see how those items are working together. And then once you get close to this curve or close to whatever curve you're listening to, listen to it and then make your adjustments afterwards. But like we said earlier, if you find yourself hitting the bass boost or hitting treble up or any of that stuff, then you may not have spec'd your system to meet what your personal expectations were. You may want to look at the system back again. So budgeting, I'm going to do this very short and sweet. Rob really touched on it, is balance the budget. Balance the budget to me is you don't buy W7s and buy an 8-gauge wire and an amplifier that is 300 watts. You got to spread your budget. You know what your entire budget is and plan that budget across the entire project and spread it out evenly. You can't build an 800 horsepower motor with a $50 fuel system. It's just not going to work properly and give you the expectations. And it may meet your expectations, but the reliability may not be there. So your expectations will only be met for that short duration of time. And then you're going to have a really sad face when you start running into reliability issues. So make sure you spread that out nice and evenly across the entire project and don't skimp out. And as it is with most projects, everything is only going to be as good as the weakest link in there. So if your integration piece isn't great and you really cheaped out on it and it's putting a crappy signal into the amplifier, well, that really crappy signal is going to be amplified and you're not going to have a clean output. So again, just make sure that you guys are spreading that budget out wisely throughout the entire system. All righty. So I want it done right now and I want it cheap, said a thrifty and patient person. We've become in a time where Amazon and Facebook and social media, everything is immediate. We can see the news immediately. We can see what's going on in the world immediately. And that's kind of tapped our patience a little bit. And this is a spot to have that quick conversation that you can get something done right now, but it's probably not going to be cheap because you're paying somebody for the experience that they've done that same job 1,000 times. And they're paying because they have really expensive tools that are going to help make them a more efficient installer or a more efficient builder. Now, on the flip side of that, not everybody does have that. So per hour, you might not get charged as much, but it may take a little bit more time to get your system done too. So just keep that in mind. There's a very good balance of that. If you are doing it and you're paying to get it cheap and you're paying right now, there's probably going to be a compromise somewhere, either in the equipment or the reliability of what's going on in there. So good work isn't cheap and cheap work isn't good is normally how that saying goes there. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you know what you're getting and make sure that you're paying to get it done right. The installation and paying for that is going to really be part of that reliability issue. So when we also get into budgeting isn't always how cheap things can be. Sometimes it's a decent amount that you have to work with and that you need to build around that. And here's actually a bunch of systems that I did that were priced very similar to one another, but they meet very different needs between the different users on here. So the first system I have on here is an HD 751 with a 12 W7AE. We're going to get 750 watts of power out of it. And we have quite a bit of piston displacement out of that single 12 W7AE, and it's going to sound really good, and it is going to be really loud. And that's good. If somebody wants that sub output, then they can put that money towards there. Now, maybe they want to spread it out a little bit more. They don't just want to upgrade just the subs. Well, then we can go with an XD 1001 V2. We have 1,000 watts. We actually have a little bit more piston displacement on there, but we also have room in the budget to add a couple C1 6.5s into the system too. So it's spreading it out a little bit differently. And then down the line, if we want to add a full range amplifier in there to help equal things out a little bit more, we can. Or we can go down to an RD 501, an RD 404, 12W1 V3, and some C3 components up front, and a coaxial C2 in the back there, and we get good power on there. But you can see our piston displacement is down a little bit on there too. Now we can also do the same thing, VX 1005i. So we've gone to a system amplifier, which is going to kind of reduce the cost of wiring and stuff like that. And also with the DSP built into it, it's going to reduce the cost of your cabling in there also. You don't have extra RCA cables to go to each amplifier. You don't have separate power and ground wires going to each amplifier, distribution blocks and all of that stuff. So it does simplify it down quite a bit. And we can go with two 15W0 V3s to get that big piston displacement out of there and have that ability to move and compress and rarefy a lot of air there. So you can do it a lot of ways, and then you'd have some C2s on your VX 1005i on the full range channels and be able to do some tuning with that too. So it gives you that option on there too. So again, like Steve said earlier, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, whether you're looking for displacement or whether you have a budget and you're trying to work within that budget and being able to spec out your equipment properly. So I am the worst at sketching things out. I will be honest. I draw things up a lot. Anything I build, I always draw it up. It doesn't always look like what the final product is. And in fact, it doesn't really ever look like that because I'm terrible at sketching. But I do always sketch things out. And when I am designing a system, I have a whiteboard down in my garage, and I write on it, and I write every little detail that I need, so that way I'm not missing things on there. And I'm going to start off with sketching out this building a system, and this is going to be something that we're going to do. Start off with the biggest upgrade, which is your subwoofer and subwoofer amplifier, and then I'm going to build out the system as we go along here. So I'm going to start off with the JD 501, and we're going to do a CP 212 W0 V3 box, ported enclosure, and you get great output, 500 watts, impedance, everything matches up very, very well. And I have on the left-hand side my list of needs for that. I have a fuse block, power wire, speaker wire. I'm going to need integration, signal cables, and sound damping in the trunk because I don't want my license plate to rattle or anything like that. Now, if I go in and I want to build that system up a little bit, I can go in and add that full range amplifier, the JD 400/4 in there, and I can do a set of coaxials in the front. Now, when I add that secondary amplifier in there, I'm probably going to need distribution blocks to split my power wire off to go to the two separate amplifiers. I'm going to need another set of signal cables. So there are some additional things just by adding that secondary amplifier and additional costs in there. Now, when my budget grows a little bit bigger, I can take those coaxials from the front, put them in the back, and add a set of components up front. And now I've upgraded pretty much everything in the system in stages. And they're good stages that really make sense. And price-wise, they're not huge steps to go through on there. Now, you'll need to make sure that the 6.5s will fit in your rear doors. And that's part of planning out what fits and all of that. So just keep that in mind. It's nice to sketch it out. It's good to have a plan. You always need to kind of know where you're going on there. Now, I did this all-around system, which is really cool. It's a VX 1005i on a set of C3 6.5s up front and a set of C3 6.5s in the back. Two 10W3V3 sealed enclosure. Now, when I write this out, I actually put my enclosure dimensions and all of that information on there. A lot more than what I have on here now for you guys, but it would clutter up all of the details that we have. Again, you're going to have 4-gauge power, fuse block, speaker wires, integration of some sort, signal cables, and sound damping on there also. Now, base system, when we get bigger, as we get bigger, the supporting needs also get bigger. So you can see we've gone to an HD 1200/1, which is going to draw a lot more current than the previous system. So now we've gone to bigger power wire on there. We've gone to an augmented ground, Glenn. So I do have that on there. Fuse block, speaker wire integration, signal cable. I've added in big 3 electrical upgrades, which is upgrading those factory electrical wires in the system. So that way I'm not having a weak link getting power to my amplifier. I've probably added in some sort of alternator upgrade and maybe a battery upgrade if needed to. But the alternator is first and foremost going to be my first priority. And then sound damping. We're going to be moving a lot of air. I definitely need to make sure I've got panels that are not rattling or anything like that in that specific vehicle. And then last but not least, I have a high fidelity system in here. We have our 2-gauge power wire, augmented ground, fuse block. We have distribution blocks because we have 2 separate amplifiers on here. Speaker wire integration, signal cables, sound damping. Directional plates is probably something when we start looking at these higher end C7s that we're going to want to do. And we're also going to probably want to bolster up any where that 6.5 is mounted to. I personally, I will say this, I won't put it out as a general rule, but if we're using a larger mid-bass driver that's going to have a move a little bit more and we want to get that good performance out of that mid-bass driver, we need to make sure it's mounted rock solid and not moving around. So then for your mid-range and your tweeter, you might want to have some on-axis directional plates. Again, it just depends on what your personal expectations are. Sometimes certain vehicles, they get a little bit too distracting in the pillars there, and I just utilize the factory locations and try to make some corrections with the DSP on there. Again, it just depends on what your end goal and your end result is on there. And then you're going to have your electrical upgrades that you're going to want to go through and do on that also. When I spec this system out, the other way I was going to spec it out was 2 VX 1005Is, which would be a pretty cool system to do. You could run each sub off of the sub channel of the amplifiers, and then you'd have your same amount of 8 channels of output from that 2 VX 1005Is on there too. So you could do that too. All righty. So just recapping on here and just going through and finishing everything up, you know what you have to work with first. Figure it out. Take a look at the vehicle. Look at the space you have to work with. Look with the electrical system that you have to work with. Understand the budget that you have to work with. And then really dig into the goals and the expectations on there. You need to make sure that everything kind of works in a nice, cohesive pyramid with budget, goals, expectations, and then also with reliability on there too. Match the products to each other. It's not just about buying the most expensive product and thinking that it's all going to work very, very well together in there. It's not about that. Match the products to one another. Make sure that your power ratings, impedance, and current draw all fit what the vehicle's giving you and what the subwoofers that you are connecting to, and all of that together. And to the listener too, you know, like we said earlier, the listening habits of the person dictate a lot of what's going on when we're speccing out these systems. And if you do that and you lay all of these out, you make a good plan, you're really going to end up maximizing your performance and the reliability of the system. And you're going to be happy, or your customer that you built the system is going to be happy at the end of the day. And it's all about having good, reliable performance in our music, and at the end of the day, it's having that great listening experience and not having a bad experience of poor reliability or under expectations.
Awesome, Kevin. That was great. Obviously, hour and a half, the long one. Definitely a lot of content. My recap would be a little different. Nothing wrong with what you put out there. My recap is good systems don't happen by accident. You need to plan them. You need to kind of figure out what the goals are going to be. And Kevin, I really appreciate that you started with the 2 things that are really going to dictate everything else. You started off with the vehicle, what's going to physically fit and what's going to electrically fit. From there, everything else can be mixed and matched in so many different ways. There's tons and tons of choices. I know I've looked at a lot of the support tickets that we get through tech, and people say, well, what's going to be better? Is it going to be 410s or is it going to be 612s? There's so many different options. There's tons of them. But when you start with the vehicle, what fits the vehicle physically and electrically, the rest, that's where the conversation lives, and that's where it really gets fun. But I really appreciate how you showed all the different things that are necessary for the system designs at the end. You accounted for things like sound dampening, the proper wires integration, the proper installation. You talked about not rushing it, and that delicate compromise of how much can you really afford to spend versus what performance expectations you really have. Our shops, they want to sell you the right product so that the only time they want to see you back is when you come in with your friend. Right? No one likes it when it breaks. No one does. It's not fun for anyone involved in any of this aspect of things. So good system design is absolutely vital. And I think, frankly, that's why we all got passionate. That's why we got excited. And that's why it took an hour and a half to cover this topic. And quite honestly, it could have taken a lot longer if we went into any of the more significant details, right. Which I don't want to say the details are unimportant, but that's where some of this magic can really happen. You got a shop like, Glenn's shop. He knows the stuff. He's really good at it. There's a number of shops around the country that they're really, really good at it. And it may seem like it's easy for them, but it's coming from that experience. And Kevin, you spoke about that when you were talking about the installation aspect of things, that you're paying for experience. You're paying for people that really know what's going on. So yeah, I guarantee you can find someone that will be cheaper than a guy like Glenn Savage. I guarantee it. But what I can't guarantee is that you'll find someone better than Glenn. Glenn does really awesome work. And he's not alone. There's lots of shops out there that do really, really good work, and they charge for it. And you want to pay for it. You really do, because it will result in better performance from whatever equipment you buy, whether it's JL Audio or any of the quality brands that you might be considering. So installation is a key part of it. And when we do our system tuning trainings, the two most important things, in my opinion, are the ones that no one likes to talk about. The first one is a proper system design, choosing the right components. And the second one is a proper installation. If you can't fix either one of those with a DSP, if you broke it with the system design or did a bad installation, the DSP is only going to polish that thing a little bit, and it's never going to be quite what you're seeking from that system. Never. So,
Steve, just to add to that too. Sorry, man. I'm like.
No doubt. If you guys got to go at this point, feel free to go. There are a couple of questions in the chat I did want to address, and we got to recap. So if you got to go, our feelings aren't hurt.
When we talk about the install and all of that, if you buy really expensive product, okay, so if you're buying W0s or whatever, and you're just doing a basic enclosure, you could probably get away with it. It's probably going to have some flex to it or whatever, but are you going to be like, holy cow, I was really expecting way more out of that than what it is? But if you put two 13W7s in a 3/4 inch MDF enclosure with no bracing or anything else like that, you're probably going to say,
what's the hype all about? These things are horrible.
So it scales up, the expectations and also the downfall like that. Ooh, man, I was expecting a lot more. Scales up when you go higher. So again, just to spread that budget around, make sure the enclosure is built properly. You will never fix a subwoofer flexing the enclosure with DSP or anything else. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. You got to make sure every single aspect of the system is built properly, laid out, spec properly, and everything starts with building the plan or your system design. It really does. And your install is really secondary to that. And then your equipment, as long as you're using good name brand equipment, I would say your equipment is really the third in line when you're taking a look at that. As long as it's spec to work with one another properly, you're gonna be good, and you're gonna meet a good expectation as long as you have the first couple parts of that right.
Yeah, further to Kevin's point, I would sooner sell lower level product, higher the labor dollars, the install dollars. pay for better installation, more deadening material and things of that nature, better wires and all those other things. And maybe go down a level from a C5 to a C3 or from a C7 to a C5 or something like that, W7 or W6. Scale back the product and pay more for the install to make sure it's dialed in right. We many years ago, ages ago, too long ago, we did a training on how to do proper door panels, how to build out a door properly, and we actually had so if we had 4 factory doors, one that was just dead factory with just a woofer, the standard speaker that came from the factory, and then we did 3 different levels of proper installation. And I would sooner do the level 3 door with a C1 level product than a C7 in a level 1 build. If you follow what I'm talking about, is the level 1 build was basically just a speaker mounted in a door with really nothing else. Level 3 had proper damping materials that had a proper ring, the foam spacer to couple it to the door panel. All that stuff adds up and relates, equates to better performance from whatever you put in there. So even if it's a lesser product, you'll get better performance overall when you do the install right. If you put a go ahead, Rob.
Since you're talking about C1s and doing the door right, I remember the first time I heard C1 650 coaxials was in Eric Cole's Civic.
Yeah.
And he got some pre-production ones from engineering because they hadn't even really heard them yet. So they wanted to hear them in a car. And I remember listening to them going, wow. So you put your RD amps in here, because there was a ton of mid bass out of them, like really impactful mid bass. They were loud and clean. And he was like, no, that's all off the stock Honda deck. And I was like, no way they sound this good off of like 15 watts. But he's like, but my doors are done. They were properly, dampened. He had a starboard, a high density plastic baffle that the speakers were mounted to, fast rings. And, just doing the door like that made that, $100 pair of coaxial speakers sounds significantly more expensive. Like where I thought they were on a 75 watt amplifier. So doing it right is you're going to, like I said earlier, you're not getting your money's worth if you just throw in an expensive product and don't do the installation the correct way. So,
and Kevin, you commented earlier when he was setting expectations on specific products. Someone's going to spend a lot of money on a pair of 13 W7s, right? There's an expectation because of the prestigiousness of the product and the price points of the product. And if it's executed to a very low level, they're going to be disappointed with that. But if they don't spend all that money, they buy like a lesser product, like a W1 or a W3, but it's done to the highest level, they will be blown away at the performance you can get from the less expensive product. That's where the magic is. If you can scale all that up, and Kevin used the words a number of times, that scales, right? If you do a fantastic install on an entry-level product, you'll get great results from that. If you do a crappy job on the install and you have the high-end product, you'll get crappy performance from it. And we get this a lot, and not just... We get it on our product, of course, because most people call us about our product. But we've actually heard people say that, such and such product is not that good. And I'm always very quick to defend. I'm sure it's better than you're thinking. There has to be something that we've done wrong. It has to be. Because most of the companies that we get the comparison from, we have mad respect for. They make really good product. And our expectation is that product does hold up some degree of performance. And I think it's a logical thing, right? So if for some reason the customer is unhappy with the level of performance, my inclination is to think that the application is wrong, not that the product is bad. There have been occasions, but more often than not, it's the application. They misapplied the product. They didn't do some aspect of the installation correct, or there's a mismatch of components that just didn't work well together, which goes to Kevin's point. Plan it all out. Make sure that everything is dialed in to work together for the vehicle, the physical aspect and the electrical aspect, that the impedance of the drivers line up with the power ratings for the amplifiers and the balance, the 60-40 split. There's a lot to unpack in this type of a session, which is why, again, it took an hour and a half to get to this point. But when you start peeling back some of the bits of knowledge that Kevin shared with us, you'll start seeing the value in each and every one of them. It's really good content that Kevin shared, and I do encourage you to go back and watch this if you missed some of it, or contact us and ask us questions, because there's a lot in system design. Good systems do not happen by accident. They happen by careful planning and knowledgeable people. So
I think it's also important to remember, for the consumer perspective, you have to remember you're probably always going to have some sort of compromise at some point. You can't expect this amazing system if the vehicle doesn't allow it, if the budget doesn't allow it. So there has to be some realism to the expectations as well. And, I ran out, so I don't know if I missed the triangle slide.
No, he took it out.
Oh, okay.
I skimmed it down. I skimmed the presentation down before we did it.
But I mean, we're always going to run into compromises, and we have to remember that. There was a joke earlier about the curse of base heads in trucks, and all they can fit are shallow woofers in there. Well, that's not necessarily the case. You can do a blow through, but that's a compromise. Do you want to cut the bed of your truck and port that into the cabin, or do you just go to the shallows? If you want to compete and win, professional IASCA or EMA competitions, you're going to have to pay for custom pillars or kick panels. You're probably not going to win with factory locations that are not on axis. So just remember, even though you do everything we've talked about, if it's still not to your liking, there's compromises, and usually that's going to be where the budget comes into play. Are you willing to pay to do what it needs to get to that next level?
Right.
So, it's a bit of a balancing act. My car, I wanted my car to sound really good. I'm not looking to win sound quality competitions, and I wanted A-pillars that were not big and bulky. I wanted to keep the exact factory line, which meant my C7s aren't perfectly on axis. Does my car sound great? Do I have a center image? Absolutely. Would I score the most points in an audio competition? Maybe not. But for me, I don't care about that. If I did, I would have to figure out what I wanted to do with my A-pillars. Do I go the bulky route, or do I try to make it the best I can with ESP and cross my fingers the judges like it? So be aware. There's going to be compromises at some point based on what your goals are, the vehicle obstacles, and it may mean more money, or it may mean you just got to deal with it, or
Right.
find a different route to achieve those goals. But I think that understanding the need to have to compromise at some point is also very important when it comes to system design, and not setting expectations too high that can't be met because of what you own or what the shop has to work with.
Right. I agree with that. So a little case in point, I think it's to your point anyway. My Jeep, I got a Jeep Cherokee, and I got C7 and some fun stuff in there. And currently I have an 8W7 in a sealed box that Mr. Eric Cole designed and built for me. So thank you. And when I listen to it, it sounds really nice, and that's exactly what I'm looking for: a nice tonal balance, nice full rich sound, and that's what my performance expectations are. My son, he's got a Mazda 3, and he's got some C3 speakers up front, and he's got a special weird 12-inch subwoofer that I'm playing around with in the back there, and his bass is way too strong. It's way too much, and he likes it. So he listens to my car, and he says, "Your car sounds different than mine." I said, "Yeah." He says, "There's a lot of detail in yours that I don't get in mine." I said, "Yeah, it's the C7s. It's it's a three-way DSP tuned system. It's done to the highest level." He's like, "But you don't have enough bass," and that goes back to the very beginning of the session. We talked about performance expectations. His performance expectations, he wants the bass. He'd be willing to compromise some of that detail and accuracy in favor of the bass. He acknowledges that my system sounds better overall, but he wants the bass. So in that regard, my system isn't as good as his. And he's probably right. And it reminds me of a story from, I'm going to say it, 1992. I went to a training session, and there was a car there that at the time was considered one of the best cars on the show circuit, one of the best sounding cars that had been built. And I would contend that it was one of the best sounding cars that had been built. And we didn't build it. It wasn't a JL Audio car. It was a different company and a different group of people that put it together. But they did a spectacular job in it. And I was really excited to listen to this car. So I came armed with a stack of CDs. I'm not going to listen to their demo material because they only pick the good stuff. I'm going to pick stuff that's really hard, right? So I remember sitting in the car and listening to it. I waited till the end so everybody else had their session because I was going to be the annoying guy, right? So I sit in the car, and the woman giving me the demo, she starts playing a couple of tracks, and I was like, wow, this car sounds really good. Do you mind playing some of these? She's sure, no one else is waiting. We started putting them through, and there was a track from Pink Floyd, and I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, and it was Dark Side of the Moon, and it's the heartbeat. I wanted to hear what that heartbeat would do. Now, I know what I'm looking for when I listen to the heartbeat, and in this car, it just didn't do it. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this car is different. And I remember looking at her, and I said, that sounds different than what I'm used to. She says, okay, I said, how right is this? She says, I was in the recording studio when they mastered it. It's about as right as you're going to get. And I remember I get tingles even thinking about it now. It's like, holy cow, she would know because she was there. And I said, but I don't like it. She says, I don't care. It's right. And she was being friendly because I had a relationship with her. We were friendly. But what she was saying was, you don't have to like it. If it's right, you don't have to like it. But knowing that it's right, I could say, well, then I don't like that. I want more bass. I want to goose that more. I want to alter that from what right may be. And that's the key point about preference. Guys like Glenn and shops like his around the country, and we pick on him because we're really friendly with him, but shops that really understand this stuff, they understand what right is, and they understand how to alter right towards your preference. And that's gold right there. When you can look within yourself and say, I now understand what right is, and I want to be somewhere over here. My son acknowledges that. Many of you acknowledge that, and I think that's key to all of it. Kevin brought it up several times in the presentation. It's what you want as the listener. It's what your preference is. When you're tuning it, you have the target curve, and then you alter it to the way you want it to actually sound. You are an important part of it. Are you abusive? Are you not abusive? These are the key questions that are ultimately going to determine your satisfaction with what you paid for. So a couple of life lessons in all of that. So unpack that as you will. But
Brian Tolliver's comment. The number one problem with a really good system is figuring out that the music you like is terrible.
Yep. And I remember Bill Hamsey, who works in our R&D department. He's a masterful engineer in terms of fabrication and design. He's among the best that I've ever encountered. And we were building one of our demo cars, and he put in a track, and I think it was like Linkin Park or something like that. He's like, God, this doesn't sound good at all. There's something wrong. And we're like, we know what's wrong. And he's like, no, it can't be, because I saw them in concert. I said, they didn't play a CD when you were at the concert, though. So there's something different between the live and the recording that you're playing. And on a quality system, you'll start picking up on that, like Ryan was just kind of alluding to. And what's interesting about it was I'm almost certain that it was Linkin Park, because they have a DVD of when they were live in Texas. And the DVD sounds phenomenal in the same vehicle. When you play that audio through, it sounds great. So if the system's the same and the source is different, you know where the problem lies. It's not the system at that point. And that's the key of knowing what right is.
Well,
no, we got about 2 more hours to go. Come on. Rob's trying to go.
I already got up once, man. I'm trying to drink more water, and that's probably not a good thing on training days.
Yeah. I've avoided using this. So.
Well, I think, there were a couple questions I wanted to bring up, but we're really tight on time. So if we miss them, I do apologize, guys. Please, if you need answers for those, reach out to our technical support team, technical@jlaudio.com. You can call the number on the website and follow the prompts, or the support link, or the help tabs on all the website pages. So sorry if we missed it, but I think there was so much good content and back and forth banter and stories that it was worth it.
Yeah, and if you're designing a system and you're not quite sure where to go with it, feel free to contact those guys, and they will help walk you through what you need and get you pointed in the right direction, for sure. Some smart dudes.
System design, enclosure design, I think that's the stuff they like doing the most. Obviously they love troubleshooting, you got to use your brain, but helping people pick products and design it around the vehicle and budgets. I loved doing that on the retail floor when I was in sales back in the day. And I know that those guys love it, and they're going to help you create a kick-ass, reliable system that you're going to love. So definitely reach out to them.
No doubt. So we'll end now and basically reiterate what we often do. If there's a specific topic you want us to talk about, let us know. If there's a different date or time that you prefer, just let us know. We'll do our best to accommodate. We're here for you. We put these together to try to share some good information and have some good conversation. So on that note, I'll say thank you again for watching and sticking with us as long as you have, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.